Every weekend, 24/7, it does not matter.
Tell them what breaking a black barrier mean, man. What they
Come on,
look
man.
like,
What is
man?
black, man?
What is black?
Copper Color Productions, man.
Huh?
The Copper Color King Cash Moors and Money, man. Let's get it.
Black King, stand up for understand what black is. It's the essence, it's the culture. We've been on this earth, you heard? The Bronx was called for Apache. Huh? The Bronx was called for Apache, man. Oh, last breed, bro. We bringing it back, last breed.
Really forever flying in this bitch, man. For the ancestors, baby. For all the ancestors out there, baby.
Alright. Copper Color King, man. We back in this bad boy with some more good content, man. Some more good content. Happy Sabbath to those who had a beautiful Saturday today, you know. Today's a day for the people to just chill, you know, relax. Like the Most High intended Saturdays to be a day of relaxation, right? You're supposed to kick your feet back, relax. It's the 7th day of the week, the Sabbath, the Holy Sabbath. And remember, man, I like to keep it funky with folks, man. I'm not religious. I am not religious. That's not my speed. Right, more or less though, man. I just like to deliver great historical information surrounding around the copper colored diaspora, man. Like these things that this history, man, you can't make this stuff up. This history, you cannot make it up. These facts, these details that we coming across, man, is real history, right? It's the stuff that they left out, like I continue to say. They don't want us to understand or overstand exactly what was going on or even where we come from, right? They want to keep us lost in the sauce, right? With your head in the dirt. With your head in the dirt, man. You can't see anything. You blind. You can't hear anything. You just lost in the sauce. But this is why we deliver this content. Ladies and gentlemen, man, today we're going to be talking about the Vincent Guerrero story. How many of us actually knew that Mexico's first president, right, was a indigenous, aka, well, this is what they say, right, a black indigenous, a mixed breed man, right, a black indigenous man, right? His ancestry consists of some Sephardi and whatever aboriginal tribe coming from Mexico, Central America. This was their first president, right? He's the one who set the trend, right? He set the trend. Or he set the timer for the series of events that transpired in Mexico around that time. For those who don't know, slavery was abolished in Mexico in 1821. 40 years before America even came to a point where they can abolish slavery. 40 years. 40 years. Right? 40 years. They've been on that. And one of the reasons for abolishing slavery was because the people, right? Vincent Guerrero was a representation of the people. The people wasn't jacking that. The indentured servants, right? The black folks they bought over here as slaves. We all know that they were Europeans, right? They're going to say that they was Africans, though, once we go through the story. Got to dodge all that, dismiss all that because we know it's not true. We know it's not true. Right? But the people, they wasn't jacking that. And Vincent Guerrero stood up for the people. That's the story. Check out these images, man. I always got to pull up the slideshow. As we can see, these copper-colored aboriginals in the photos linking up with these conquistadors who were also copper-colored, right? Who were also copper-colored. A lot of them of a swarthy skin complexion, a darker skin complexion, right? Right, but after linking up, like the Aztecs were already enslaving majority of the population in Mexico. So once the Spaniards arrived, it just made things worse, right? But we got to remember, Mexico's history is so rich. It starts, right, 13,000 years before the arrival of Hernan Cortez. And it continues on up until this day, right? We about to learn the history of Cinco de Mayo and all that. Mexico's rich history, Central America's rich history, man. The Vincent Guerrero story, man. Let's get right into it, man. No more chatting. Let's get right into it. So what I got for y'all, right? First thing I want to start off with, right? Before we even get into that, I want to finish going through this book right here, right? A Brief History of Mexico. Just so that we could gain an understanding of the conquest of the conquistadors once they arrived to Mexico. We need to gain an understanding on exactly how all of this stuff transpired? Like, where did it start? Where was the root? Right? We're gonna get into the indigenous roots, right? You know, the true story behind the Olmecas, how the Mongols invaded Mexico in the 13th century, how the Aztecs invaded Mexico and enslaved the population. Many tribes fighting against the Aztecs, going to war because they weren't with that, right? They even took the deity and turned it into something negative, right? And associated it with human sacrifice. As we spoke about in the last one, we know Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, Khan, Hanli, all the same person, the maize god, the creator, earth, wind, and the earth and the wind, the air, right? The creators, all the same person. So when these Aztecs arrived in Mexico, Central America, they changed the entire paradigm, right? They changed the entire story. And we're going to talk about that, though, in a later episode, man. I want to continue with this part 2. Like I said, we're going to talk about the conquest, right? So what it say? The Aztec Empire, like all empires, eventually came to an end, right? Unlike the Mayan Classic period, where historians were still unsure of why Mayan dominance declined, historians can point to one event that was the beginning of the end for the Aztecs: the arrival of Fernando Cortez and the conquistadors from Spain, right? Now they're about to get into the story. They're going to talk a little bit about this. This is extremely important because this is what set off the series of events that transpired during Vincente Guerrero's presidency, and several things that transpired before that. Vicente's time is 200 years after the arrival of the conquistadors, but this is where you had the arrival of their style of government. And we're going to see how this affected the population of Mexico as we continue, right? But let's continue. So what it say? Cortez set sail on February 18, 1519. He embarked from Cuba on an expedition that would change history. Sailing on 11 ships, Cortez commanded roughly 550 men, much like himself, ready to gamble on the adventure that lay ahead. Accompanying the men were 16 horses and some small cannons. The conquistadors sought power and wealth and were not entirely of Spanish ethnicity, right? These conquistadors, a lot of them were German Moors, French Moors, right? A lot of folks from North Africa, Morocco, you know, Portuguese folks, Spanish folks, a variety of different groups of peoples. You know, a lot of them were even forced to constrict to join the army, right? To a part of their indentured servitude. So this right here lets us know that not every person coming over here with Hernan Cortez was a quote-unquote conquistador or a quote-unquote white man, right? Big fact right there. It's a big fact. Cortez's force was comprised of people from Portugal, Germany, and Italy, right? When we all know Columbus, he came from Italy. His origins got him coming from Italy, right? He's an Italian Jewish man. Behind closed doors, of course, right? They didn't want the folks to know that, because if you were discovered to be a Jew at the time, you were being persecuted. And we talking about the Sephardi. What we got, right? Cortez arrives. Upon arrival, Cortez had some early conflicts with the indigenous tribes. He lost some men in his first conflict, but he killed over 200 Indians, and soon the rumor was spreading that the Spaniards were invincible. The Spaniards had guns and gunpowder, horses and huge dogs, which they used to eat when they were starving and had no other food left for them, no other resources. Things the Aboriginals had never seen before. Horses were described as beasts that snorted and bellowed and sweated and whose muzzles foamed. Right, but I got a drop coming out too. Horses, they potentially Aboriginal to America, right? So this whole sentence right here could be cap, straight up cap. But what they say, Cortez had one more advantage. He would soon be able to understand the Aztec language. He made contact with Geronimo de Aguilar, who had shipwrecked on the beaches of Mexico in 1511, right? You know, when they talking about these shipwrecked Africans, right? These quote unquote shipwrecked Africans, right? This is who they really were other Spaniards other conquistadors or other Europeans being shipwrecked on the beaches of Mexico and the Caribbean islands. Aguilar spoke Mayan and Spanish. Cortez was also given a maiden in one of his battles who was baptized Dona Marina. She was called Malinche by the Indians as she was considered a traitor, Malinche meaning traitor. She became Cortez's interpreter and advisor. She would communicate with the Indians and pass the message to Aguilar, who would pass it to Cortez. The involvement of Moctezuma. For those who don't know, we're going to get into this a little bit more later too, right? There were multiple Moctezumas at that time. You had multiple Moctezumas, right? So the Moctezuma that everybody know, the Black Moctezuma, right? That's just one man. You had Moctezuma the first, the second, and then you had two Moctezumas in Mexico at one time of different tribes. So again, this is why I like to point out, everybody, we can't be so quick to sit there and say, oh, yeah, Aztecs were black, those are our ancestors, because the things the Aztecs did are things that our ancestors didn't get involved with. We weren't involved with that type of stuff, right? But let's continue to move forward. He would decide how to deal with these foreigners. Moctezuma's dilemma. Moctezuma was confused and fearful as to the best way to treat the conquistadors. He was unsure of who they were or what they could be. They appeared to be some kind of invincible gods, right? You know, them and their polytheism, their idol worship. Hearing of Cortez's arrival, Moctezuma sent gifts to Cortez and then asked him to go back where he came from. As Moctezuma heard more and more about the strangers, he first ordered his magicians and warlocks to send an evil wind towards the conquistadors. He called for more human sacrifices, right? This is why I say multiple Moctezumas, different tribes, they all did different things. Not all of them were partaking in human sacrifice, but this Moctezuma specifically is the Moctezuma that everybody recognizes, right? The Black Moctezuma, the Aztec Moctezuma, right? He involved himself in human sacrifice, right? They called on the gods. So they conducted a human sacrifice to be able to create a wind from the invincible gods to send Hernan Cortez and them on their way. Right? What a way to show your love and protection for the people. That's mind blowing to me. It's mind blowing, I'm not gonna lie. When both of these strategies failed, he ordered his people to give the Spanish whatever they wanted. However, Moctezuma has still not ruled out the use of force. Moctezuma's decision. In the end, Moctezuma made the fateful decision to meet Cortez and invited him into the city. Cortez told Moctezuma that the conquistadors suffered from disease of the heart that could only be cured with gold. Got him, right? Tried to get him. Even though the Spaniards never did find the mythical El Dorado, right? Even though gold was discovered all over Mexico and all over California, right? We all know California was a part of Mexico, right? The Gold Coast, the true Gold Coast, right? All the way even down into Peru and Chile, right? Hence the Disney movie, the El Dorado Disney movie, right? Moctezuma made the Spaniards special guests and treated them like gods. The Spaniards were free to roam the city. They admired the palaces and were fascinated by the zoo, but were disgusted by the great rack covered with human skulls, signs of human sacrifice all over the place, right? Remember, these folks, they were invaders. They brought this with them from wherever they came from. We're going to talk about that, though. Like I said, 13th century invaders, right? Mongols been invading Mexico. They've been invaded. And let me just show y'all, right? This the book right here. Historical researches on the conquest of Peru, Mexico, Bogota, Natchez, and Tomeco in the 13th century by the Mongols, accompanied with elephants, mastodons, in the 13th century. Right, we're gonna get into this one. It's gonna be a good one, man. I can't wait. Right. However, Cortez realized that they were indeed trapped if Moctezuma dared to make the move. Thus, Cortez made a bold decision. He seized Moctezuma as hostage. For a while, the Aztec half-heartedly dealt with Cortez. Moctezuma told his people that he would stand with the Spanish not because he was a prisoner, but because it was the will of the gods. However, after about 6 months, the Aztec population had enough of the conquistadors and began to talk of attacking the Spanish. Right? Violence erupts. Cortez, he left Pedro del Alvarado in charge of a detachment while he was away. He left him with some Aztec troops left him with some conquistadors in the Aztec capital. While Cortez was away, the Aztecs held a festival. Alvarado got nervous and thought this festival was a threat to the Spanish. This is a true story. This is in multiple accounts. He ordered his troops to attack the Aztec aristocracy and some of the Aztecs' best warriors and had them killed. It was said that the blood of the chiefs ran like water. Right? They murked him off, right? He got nervous and crashed out. War now existed between the conquistadors and the Aztecs. Hearing that violence had erupted while he was away, Cortez hurried back to Tenochtitlan clan. The Aztecs allowed Cortez and his men to re-enter the city. This was all a part of their plan to trap the Spanish inside Tenochtitlan. The Spanish preferred to do their fighting in open spaces where they could use their horses and guns to their advantage. Now they were pinned in and forced to fight in the streets as Aztecs hid behind buildings. Cortez urged Moctezuma to get the Aztecs to stop the attack. Moctezuma climbed the rooftops to speak to his fellow Aztecs, but he was struck down and killed 3 days later. Story says he was struck down with a stone, or potentially one of Cortez's men killed him himself. But the story says he was struck down with a stone. Moctezuma was struck down with a stone. He was stoned by his own people because he the one who opened the door for them. Right on top of that, he was a cruel leader. Moctezuma was a cruel leader. Very, very cruel. The things he did to some of the people who were living within the Aztec capital. Right? We're not going to talk about the people of importance, right? They're priests and medicine men and whatever the case may be. We're going to talk about the other people who was forced to subjugate to the Aztec rule. The things they did to those people. Mind-blowing, man. And this is why a lot of tribes were migrating out of Mexico at that time. We can call it an exodus. So to say, we can sort of kind of call it an exodus. The Noche Triste. Cortez realized he must leave the city, but the Aztecs destroyed all of the bridges and cut off their escape. The conquistadors built a portable bridge and divided the treasure they had plundered from the Aztecs. Their plan was to sneak out at night. Stealth was so important that the conquistadors even wrapped their horses' hooves in cloth so they wouldn't make any noise. They made their move on July 1st, 1520. Noche Triste, or Night of Sorrow. This is a term. This is where we remember terms. I love terms, right? Let's keep this in mind. We're gonna pay attention to all of the terms that they highlight in these books for us, right? Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrow. This is the night where the conquistadors plan to sneak out of Tenochtitlan, right? An old Aztec woman gathered water spotted the Spanish, and as they attempted their escape and sounded the alarm. Aztec warriors came running, and Cortez placed Alvarado in charge of the rear guard to help cover their escape. The Spanish got across the first channel, but their bridge broke while passing the second channel, and Cortez and others were forced to swim to safety. As Cortez reached the shore, he assessed the damage of his escape. He had lost 450 men, 4,000 Indian allies, and 46 horses. These Indian allies fought alongside of Cortez to get rid of Moctezuma. Those Indian allies looked at Cortez like he was a Jesus. Like he was Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan returning, the feathered serpent returning. and helping lead the people into the promised land. Right, we're gonna learn about that. I got that in another History of Mexico book. That's why I always say, right, when I'm doing these readings, I like to connect information. 1 book, 2 book, 3 book, 4, 5 books, 6 book, more books at my mother loving door. Give me some more. For real though. The Indian allies were people who opposed Aztec rule, right? And we learned that these people were called the Zopac peoples. I got to do some research on them. I forgot about it. Too busy reading this other stuff. It was said that Cortez was so upset by the disaster that he sat under a tree and cried. True story. He moped. He wept. That was the news he had to go back to Europe with. Like, basically, they lost. But he regrouped and returned with tens of thousands of Indian allies. Cortez used his new allies to lay siege to Tenochtitlan. He captured it in 1521. The Spanish leveled the city and built on its ruins the city of Mexico, Mexico City. Now we getting into the good stuff. What we got? The keys to the conquistadors' victory. Even though the Aztecs greatly outnumbered Cortez and his conquistadors, the Spanish were able to topple the vast Aztec empire in a rather short amount of time. The Spanish had several advantages over the Aztecs. First, the Spanish held a technological advantage. Their guns, cannons, and armor were no match for the Aztecs. Secondly, the Aztecs were hated by other indigenous tribes for their cruelty. Telling y'all, right? What TikTok history don't tell you, right? They tell you that they were black, right? They tell you that they was black. All right, granted, we understand. But they don't tell you that the Aztecs were evil people and that other tribes within the Mexican borders that we know today, or Central America, assisted Cortez in overthrowing the Aztecs. Right? And then 100, 200 years later, these same folks would become the slaves, right? Check this out. Timing also played a major role in the Aztecs' defeat. According to Aztec legend, the god Quetzalcoatl was scheduled to return in the year 1519. This was the exact year in which Cortez landed in Mexico. Because the Spanish looked nothing like the Aztecs had ever seen before, Moctezuma may have believed that Cortez was the god Quetzalcoatl. Right? They thought he was like Jesus coming back, returning. Right? Like we learned in the last one. For those who didn't tune in, go check it out. They thought Quetzalcoatl was like Jesus. He is the Jesus, to be honest, right? The feathered serpent, the plump serpent. The Spanish also unknowingly brought with them an invisible and deadly killer disease. The Aztecs had no immunity against the smallpox. The smallpox was the flu at the time, y'all. It was the flu. That was the flu. And the Spaniards brought it over with them, right? And finally, the different tactics used by the Spanish and the Aztecs had significant impact on why the Aztecs fought unsuccessfully against the conquistadors. Because the Aztecs believed so firmly in human sacrifice, they preferred to capture their enemies alive so that they can be sacrificed to appease the gods later. Right? Human sacrifice. The Aztecs, this is why the other tribes hated them, because they was doing crazy stuff, right? But right, we about to get into the good stuff. We about to learn about the root of slavery in Mexico, right? The beginning of a colony. All these different systems and terms that they about to introduce. I need y'all to pay attention, right? The encomienda system. What was it, right? What was it? The encomienda was a labor grant. in which the encomiendo, conquistadors and their descendants, was given control over indigenous community. This is sort of kind of like manifest destiny here in America. Push westward, dominate, control, take over the land, and leave it for your descendants. The encomienda was the Mexican manifest destiny, right? That's what we're gonna call it. The encomiendo received tribute and free labor from the Indians under his control. In exchange, the encomiendo was to care for the Indians by converting them to Christianity, guaranteeing the safety of the village, and providing for the overall well-being of the Indians. Same thing like here in America, right? This is what the treaties was about. These business propositions, like, all right, boom, you give us your land and we take care of you. We make you a part of the government that we trying to create here in America. We take care of you. We protect you from the other nations, from the other tribes, right? We start these tribal wars and put you two against each other. This was the plan from the start. And people, I be thinking it's crazy sometimes, because it's like, all right, bet. You got to think about it. The French, the Spanish, and the British all had similar methods when they came over here to America. It's almost like they worked together, right? And understanding that, you kind of understand that over there in Europe, at one point in time, all of those people were connected, right? In some way, shape, or form. They were all under the Roman Empire. And once the Roman Empire broke up, you had the development of these different nations, right? So we could kind of understand how they brought over the same type of enslavement methods, right? This is slavery in a nutshell. In theory, the encomienda system placed the Indians in a state of serfdom. Serfs, right? Serfs, servants, serf, a servant, right? They were overworked, cheated, physically mistreated, and separated from their families. Generally speaking, the encomienda system demeaned the Indians and created the economic and social problems that are still seen in Mexico till this very day. Like I said, right? Their history, their rich history, up until this day, up until today, right? This book is a little older, but even still, up until today, right? You have the effects of the caste system, right? Racism against darker skinned people. Under the system of mercantilism, the purpose of a colony was to make the mother country stronger and more self-sufficient. Mexico, as a colony of Spain, existed to benefit the mother country, Spain. Mexico supplied raw materials to Spain, and then Spain produced finished goods from those raw materials. Spain then sold the finished goods back to Mexico at a profit. The Spanish king was very strict in enforcing the belief that the colony should benefit the mother country. For example, wine and olive oil, both North African aphrodisiacs. These are Moorish aphrodisiacs, y'all, right? Moorish aphrodisiacs, olive oil and wine, right? These is what they sold a lot on sorry, y'all. These are some of the commodities that they sold across the Mediterranean, right? These are North African, Moorish, not Berber or Arabic, none of that. These are North African commodities through and through. They were found on all traditional Spanish tables and wine was necessary for mass. Yet the profits for these two items were so great for those who lived in Spain, and that the growing of vines and olive oil trees was not allowed in Mexico. Thus, colonists had to pay high prices for something they can easily grow in their own backyard. Taxation and inflation, y'all. Early in the 1500s, right? But real quick, right? Olive oil and wine right? This is the part of the Mediterranean diet. Olive oil and wine. Right there. Let you know right here. right? And olive oil is definitely one of the healthiest oils for you, right? If you eat it correctly, right? But this is a Moorish aphrodisiac, right? Our copper-colored brothers and sisters over there in Europe, right? Even though a lot of them were colonizers, so to say, you know, they brought this over with them, right? So some of our ancestors, right? Let's pay tribute to the ancestors, right or wrong, right? They brought this stuff over there with them, right? Not these whitewashed conquistadors, right? These white conquistadors that you see in all of these images and stuff, right? Not those folks. Not even close, right? Not even close. They were important foods of the Spanish diet. They were found on all traditional Spanish tables, and wine was necessary for mass. I'm telling y'all. Thus, colonies had to pay high prices for something they could easily grow in their own backyard, right? We understand that. Bullinism, right? So we got the encomienda system, and now we got bullinism. The Spanish believed that true wealth consisted of precious metals. Now, Cortez and the conquistadors had hoped to find El Dorado, or at least some gold, but silver mines, not gold, would go on to provide the wealth of Mexico. Silver mines were notorious as being horrific places to work, and many Indians died in the silver mines. Workers only lasted about 5 years working in a mine. Harsh conditions, right? Just like the coal mines here in America. Harsh conditions. The end of the encomienda system. On the key part of the mercantilist system was that there were workers in the colony that were willing to work. The Spanish were not pleased with the encomienda system. By the 1550s, the encomienda system was on a decline, and Spain had also abolished slavery, right? Real important, because it was supposed to be abolished in 1550, right? And even in the Americas, Bloody O'Reilly, a conquistador, Spanish conquistador, outlawed slavery over there in Louisiana around the same time. But they found different ways to enslave the people, right? Look, Spain now needed a new way to get labor from Mexico. Thus, the king enacted repartimiento, which was a system of forced labor, slavery, right? From one system, from encomienda, to another. Under this system, each adult Indian male had to contribute 45 days of labor a year, usually a week at a time. In theory, the Indians were supposed to be paid and treated fairly. In practice, however, they were mistreated, forced to work excessive hours, and cheated out of their pay, right? The slavery stuff, right? Under the repartimiento, however you pronounce it, right? This was forced labor, and the Indians did not like it. They weren't treated fairly, right? They were mistreated and forced to work excessive hours, cheated out of their pay. We about to see how long this stuff transpired, right? How long it transpired, how long the inhabitants, the aboriginals, the true peoples, how long they've been fighting against this stuff. Just fighting, how long? Right? The haciendas, repartimiento, I keep pronouncing it incorrectly. Bruce Lee, what up, my brother? What it do, Chicken Stew? We back with another one. How you feeling? We feeling good today. How you feeling, my brother, man? Let me know. Repartimiento was not the only thing replacing the encomienda system. Soon those in Mexico began creating large haciendas. These were great agricultural estates held by individuals. Plantations, hacienda, plantation, great agricultural estates. These haciendas grew corn and wheat, and were also involved with cattle and sheep. Travelers could see cattle herds as large as 150,000 and sheep herds as large as 2 million. In fact, one man was able to acquire over his lifetime a plantation that was 11,626,850 acres long. Haciendas, plantations, owners acquired land from the Indians through purchase, fraud, or coercion, right? Same stuff going on over there in Mexico, right? Stealing the land, buying the land, right? Like how over here in New York, right? They sold it for trinkets through fraud, lying, right? And coercion, being forced, right? If you don't give me your land, I'm gonna kill all your people. I'm gonna kill your entire family, right? And these weren't the Aztec, the fighting Indians, right? These were the people fighting against the Aztecs for their brutality. So these were peacemaking people, right? These Indians that they speaking about, the peacemakers. This is how they was getting over on them. The same way they did it with the tribes here in America at the same time, right? The French, the Spanish at the same time. However, haciendas and villages coexisted in a synergy that allowed Spaniards to profit modestly, and Indian villages to preserve some autonomy in land. The Roman Catholic Church in New Spain was much more than merely a religious institution, right? They merged the church and the state. The church became a political power. The church allowed Spain to justify the conquest because Spain believed it was saving souls. Thus, the church became the most important institution in the making of New Spain. It was supposed to culturally transform the indigenous tribes by molding the hearts and the minds of the conquered people. Right? You mold the hearts and the minds, right? Basically, right? Basically, dumbing them down and then reteaching them to follow them, to be followers, right? Robots. Just like how people are today. Dumbed them down, removed them away from their true ways of life, their true ways of living, following the plum serpent, the ways of Quetzalcoatl, right? The peacemakers. They molded their hearts and minds of the conquered people. Furthermore, right, this also includes like propaganda, right? The missions, the missionaries, the missions, where the schools and churches are, stuff like that. Furthermore, Spain pledged to convert all indigenous tribes to Christianity. Spain considered it their mission to defend the Catholic faith where it already existed and spread it to the New World. There were two branches of the church now present in New Spain, the secular clergy and the regular clergy. The secular clergy included the priests that served under the bishops. The regular clergy was comprised of the missionaries, like the Franciscans, French folks, Dominicans, and Augustinians. The missionaries were considered more dedicated, mostly because they were better educated. Soon there were monasteries all over regions of New Spain. Let's see who these Franciscans is, right? We're going to look up these three peoples. The Franciscans are a group of related mendicant religious orders of the Catholic Church. Founded in 1209 by the Italian Saint Francis of Assisi. All right, so they're not French, they're Italian. These orders included 3 independent orders for men, orders for nuns, such as the Order of St. Clare and the Third Order of St. Francis, open to male and female members. They adhered to the teachings and spiritual disciplines of the founder and of his main associates and followers, such as Clare Assisi and Anthony of Padua. All right, so these Franciscans, right, they were Italian, right? They weren't even Spanish. They were Italian. And then you have Dominicans, true Dominicans, right? True Dominicans, right? This is why I always say, like, Dominicans always say they not black. And I'd be like, all right, stop calling yourself. I mean, then you can keep calling yourself a Dominican because they not black, right? So, quote unquote. But if you do the historical research, these Dominicans, if you classified them today, they would be ethnically classified as black. Right? They are ethno-national people, a people of shared ancestry and culture who have answered. They talking about Dominicans and DR. Right? These Dominicans, they came from Spain and North Africa. Some in North Africa as well. Right? A lot of these folks were Moors as well. Right? Just to let folks know, a lot of them folks was Moors. And the Augustinians, right? Who are the Augustinians? Let's see. Members of the Augustinian order, an adherent of the doctrines of St. Augustine. Augustinians are members of several religious orders that follow the rule of St. Augustine, written in about 400 AD by Augustine of Hippo. Right? I'm assuming this comes from Rome. Right? This comes from Rome. all the way back to 400 AD. This is stuff they bringing over here to America. The missionaries were considered more dedicated, mostly because they were better educated. Soon there were monasteries all over all regions of New Spain. Right? They conquered it. They conquered and implemented their religious ways, right? And we all know they had crypto Jews coming over here, like these quote unquote mulatto folks, Maranos. They were all copper colored, right? And behind closed doors, these was Muslims and Jews, a lot of them, right? To be factual. But the church was so much more than just a religious institution. The monasteries served as centers for both spiritual and political teachings. Told y'all, they merged the church and the state. They merged it and made it a political power. They also served as an area where goods were exchanged, and they even taught the Indians that they had some rights. You know what this is basically saying, y'all? We got to understand. We got to understand, right? They are saying that Catholicism, Christianity and Catholicism founded the colony. They funded the colony. Funded. They funded the colony. Religion funded slavery. Right? Let that sink in. Right? For those who gonna wake up and go to church tomorrow. Let that sink in. They used Catholicism, the church, the Pope, right? Whatever, the king, to fund the new colony, New Spain. The Spaniards who made the long journey from Europe felt the church was a link to the mother country. And in the absence of the banks, the church also served as a place where the elite could get loans. The church was a bank, huh? The church was a bank. It was a goddamn bank. The Catholic Church was a bank. Ooh, big drop. So not only a place of prayer, quote unquote, and other stuff that we not going to speak about, right? Because we know they real sick over there. But it was also a bank. Right, look at this, right? This is how easy, I always say this, right? This is why it was easy for a lot of the tribes, because their belief systems already kind of sort of associated with the belief of Jesus Christ and the Virgin Saint Mary, or whatever the case may be, right? Even though in some way, shape, or form, some forms of them are idol worship, those who followed the true way, no wonder why it was easy for them to convert. Check this out. The indigenous tribes would take the ideas of Catholicism and combine them with part of their own Indian heritage. The focus for these indigenous Catholics was still on family and community life, as well as celebrations of the life and agricultural cycle. They were still hunting and healing rituals. But check this out though, look at what they said. The focus for these indigenous Catholics was still on family and community, as well as celebrations of life and agricultural cycle, right? Sacrifice of the first fruits. These people were monotheistic. These Indians that they speaking about, right? The ones who fought against the Aztecs. They still had their hunting and healing rituals. So the Indians were converted to Catholicism, but they blended old beliefs with those of Christianity. The church had to allow this to happen, or conversion would have been very difficult. The best example of an Indian Catholicism was the Virgin of Guadalupe, right? The Virgin of Guadalupe appeared to be a man by the name of Juan Diego. She appeared to Juan as the Virgin Mary and spoke to him in the language of the Aztecs, Nahuatl. This is idol worship, y'all. This is idol worship. The Virgin of Guadalupe asked Juan Diego to tell the bishop to build a shrine at the site of their encounter, Tepeyac Hill, so she could give grace to all those who sought her. Juan told the bishop of his encounter with the Virgin of Guadalupe, but the bishop did not believe. He did not believe Juan and wanted some sort of evidence that Juan was telling the truth. On December 12th, Juan was once again visited by the Virgin of Guadalupe, and she ordered Juan to return to Tepeyac Hill. Juan did as he was instructed, and when he returned to the hill, he found a rose bush flowering on the hill in the middle of winter. He wrapped the roses in his cloak and took them to the bishop. As Juan unwrapped the roses to show the bishop, they fell to the floor and left an image of the Virgin imprinted on the cloth. Juan Diego became Mexico's first saint in 2002, and the Virgin of Guadalupe became the patron saint of Mexico. In fact, she was so important that the novelist Carlos Fuentes once stated, "One may no longer consider himself a Christian, but one cannot truly be considered a Mexican unless one believes in the Virgin of Guadalupe." Right, this started in 1531, right, and then the first saint came about in 2002. That's how long them things had an effect on that area, on Mexico. That's how long the slavery and the Catholicism and all of that left his mark on Mexico. It's the same as here in America, right? This is why I always say, like, we brothers and sisters in this, right? We so focused on division, we don't understand that they use the same tactics to get us all in the head, right? And it's crazy. It's crazy. They use the same tactics. They use the tactics to get the Jews and the Muslims, right? The Huguenots, right? Those who fought against the church over there. They used it to get the people over here. They used it to get folks in China, right? Them priests and missionaries in China over there. We already know that the president of China now, his great-great-great-grandfather was a Catholic missionary. He ain't even follow the ways of the true Chinese, so to say. And we all know, even in that area, the true inhabitants of that land are black. So they did the same thing full circle, man. And these effects, we still feel them up until today. This is why it's crazy, right? The conquistadors were not colonists, but were adventurers. They left their wives at home and traveled to the New World free from domestic life. Thus, from the beginning, Spaniards mixed freely with the female natives. This racial mixing was referred to as mestizaje. There were only 3 basic ethnic groups in New Spain: Spanish, Indian, and African. This is where we get them right here, right? Spanish, Indian, and African. They saying these is 3 ethnic groups. We cannot call these 3 different ethnic groups, right? These are all misnomers, right? Misnomers, because a Spanish person, an Indian person, and an African can all be black. So what they mean to say is, right, you had Aboriginals from here and a multi melting pot of ethnic colored peoples from Europe who are of African descent and Spanish descent. They speak Spanish but are black. Right? I hate when I see this, because it's like, how do you classify these as 3 different ethnic groups? You can't do that. You can't do that and then say that they black, right? Watch, this is why they saying Vincent Guerrero was a black Indian. It doesn't make sense, right? What's the Peninsulares? They were born in the country of Spain. These individuals held the highest government jobs and also controlled the mines. You had Criollos. They were entirely of Spanish blood, but they were born in the colony of Mexico. They looked like Peninsulares because they were born in the New World. They had a lower status in society. Despite their secondary rank, Criollos still held a favorable position in society, as their light skin made them superior to the darker masses. The mestizos, they were of Spanish and Indian parentage. Mestizos, right? Black and Indian. Because of their mixed ancestry, most could not aspire to higher positions in society. They were darker. They found work as servants, artisans, entrepreneurs, traders, and laborers. They were darker, right? When you took the swarthy skin complexions of the folks coming from Europe, and then you mixed it with the swarthy skin complexions of the Aboriginals here in America, what you get. Right, look, I want to show y'all. This is why I like bringing up the slideshow. Check this out. Check it out. What we got here? Swarthy Aboriginals, right? In this whitewashed photo of all these conquistadors. They all look alike. That's how you know they all whitewashed. Yeah. It's definitely, there was definitely black Indians in Los Angeles. Definitely, bro. Definitely. Right? Definitely. For sure. There's no denying that. Right? We can't call them Africans. That's too far inland to say they were African. Right? Too far inland. But look, check this out. More swarthy Aboriginals, right? They say this is Moctezuma, a bearded black man. Right? Moctezuma II. Swarthy Aboriginals. Also another depiction of Moctezuma II. Black man. Right? Skip this one. Right? Swarthy Aboriginals. Moctezuma. A black man. In this depiction, he almost looks like he can be a Spanish Moor. Right? These guys are also darker than what we think they are. Way darker. Check this out. Black European disciples. I'm telling y'all. They did this. Criollos and mestizos are just classifications to separate the races based off color and status. And your status came with color. That's crazy, right? That's why your color is not now today, right? Being called black is almost like being, you could say a person is damn near a wall. You're a brick wall. You're a slice of bread. That's black, right? The color of our skin, they made that a status, not who we ethnically are. Who we ethnically are, right? We come from tribes and nations, right? Hence the 12 tribes, right? The 12, we come from tribes and nations. We don't identify with skin color. They use this to separate the masses through their skin colors. Mestizos and Criollos. Criollos are Creoles. Mestizos are mulattoes. And what did we learn, right? Go check out the biggest lie ever told video. We learned that a blackamoor was basically, an Indian, a mulatto is basically a blackamoor and an Aboriginal mixed. That's what created the term mulatto. And then mulatto progressed into Negro and black. Mestizo is mulatto. Creoles are also black folks too. Right? They're just lighter skin. Lighter skin. Criollos and Creole, French and Spanish terms. Right? They say Creoles was haciendos, right? What did we learn about haciendas? Those are plantations. So haciendos are plantation owners. Yeah, big facts. It's a lot of references over here in America, all throughout North, South, and Central, that make references to the old lands of Phoenicia, Carthage, the Carthaginians, the Phoenicians, even Atlantis. Right? We check out my older videos. We can even work on something. We can work on something. I'm with that. Check out my older clips, man. My older videos. We talk about it. We're gonna even get into it a little bit more. I can't wait to bring videos like this, right? Books like this, like I said, historical researches on the conquest of Peru, Mexico, Bogota, Natchez, and Ptolemaco in the 13th century by the Mongols. By them stinking Mongols. Them stinking Mongols. Them goddamn Mongols, man. Right, but anyway, Indians and Native Americans were considered inferior by the Spaniards. The Spaniards called them gente sin razón, or people without reason. The Spaniards described the Indians as lazy, untrustworthy, and backward, right? The same description they would give to black people. Because the colony's welfare depended on their labor, the natives were doomed to serve the needs of the Spanish. Right here they bring in Africans, right? African slaves were also a part to make up of the society of New Spain. Though considered more reliable than Indian labor, African slaves were expensive as they had to be purchased and brought over from Africa. There were strict regulations placed on Africans in New Spain, as they couldn't carry arms, had to observe a curfew, and no more than 3 could gather in public, right? This is basically just a shot at black people, right? Not truly saying that it's Africans, right? Let's remember, these Europeans who are dark-skinned, they are classified as having sub-Saharan African descent, right? That's all because of the North African Moorish connection, right? Because of that connection. But we got to remember, black people have been all over this world for thousands of years, man. Thousands of years. So that whole bringing Africans to Mexico doesn't make sense. When you go to Mexico now and you go to the darker skinned communities, right? It's a guy on YouTube named Chechen Effect, and he travels, right? And he goes to these places, right? Dumb people don't even look African, right? They don't even look African. They are just darker, but with the same features as other Aboriginals. So you just gotta remember, man, that stuff, it's not gonna rock out. But we getting into the juicy stuff, right? We're gonna dive into the Vincente Guerrero story, right? So look, inspiring revolt. Over time, the people of Mexico began to have more and more issues with the Spanish king. At home in Europe, Spain had its own problems. When the Habsburg royal family was replaced by the Bourbons, a new royal family was now in charge of Spain and its colonies, which would certainly impact New Spain. Mexicans were also looking at the world around them and were seeing new beliefs emerge during the Enlightenment and witnessed several other colonies achieve independence. Mexicans were soon inspired to achieve their own independence. Bourbon reform. Spain wanted to reaffirm its control over the colony and Mexico and make sure it was staying true to the mercantilist system and supporting the mother country. Thus, in the 1780s, the crown instituted the Bourbon reforms. The new system was designed to maximize profit collection, insert a colony, demanded Spanish goods, and created new tax systems that would be collected by the peninsulars, right? This was sort of kind of like what Great Britain did on America and what led to the American Revolution, right? This is what led to the American Revolution. Stuff like this. New tax systems being imposed on the colonizers, right? Right? They basically overpriced the colonizers in Mexico on goods, and they wasn't jacking that. So check this out. These new reforms upset the Criollos, the light-skinned folks in power, even though under this new system they were able to get high-paying jobs in the military. The Criollos were forced to pay higher taxes and were also being removed from the top government jobs. The Criollos believed they were their true Mexicans, descendants of the conquistadors, but linked to the Aztecs by their birth in New Spain. Soon a national conscience formed, right? Like that's crazy, right? To have this ideology. That's crazy. They not the true Mexicans, though. They can't be, right? They can't be, because the Aztecs ain't even the true Mexicans. Soon a national conscience formed. There was a sense that Mexico was a geographical and cultural space much different from Spain. Criollos started celebrating their native culture, or their Mexicanidad, right? Their Mexicanidad, their native culture, quote unquote. They no longer called themselves Criollos, but instead preferred to call themselves Mexicanos, right? The origins of the term Mexicans. Furthermore, the Virgin of Guadalupe gave Criollos, Mestizos, and Indians a shared sense of identity. They were Mexicans, right? They all were mixed with the blood of the Aboriginals. So get that African stuff up out of here, right? They all were Mexicans. All of them had some type of Aboriginal blood in their DNA. Some even still full-blooded. The Enlightenment was an age of reason and science. One of the greatest Enlightenment thinkers was John Locke. He wrote that the government exists to protect life, liberty, and property. The Enlightenment encouraged the values of liberty, citizenship, freedom, and equality. Soon the Criollos and others wanted these natural rights in Mexico. Right? And just north of Mexico, a group of colonies fought for its independence starting in the 1770s. The members of the 13 colonies banded together to revolt against King George III of Great Britain. Amazingly enough, the colonists won and were able to achieve independence. This system became a model for all the Latin American countries. What they did here in America was the foundation for the revolutions in other countries, right? Even in Haiti. Check this out. The French Revolution. Not long after that, the American Revolution concluded. The people of France revolted against their king. The French people overthrew one of Europe's most powerful monarchies. Once again, this revolution reinforced the values of liberty and equality to the Mexican people. In addition to the Haitian Revolution, which we spoke about, and it created a social versus political revolution. Criollos recognized that revolution was destructive and involved in international wars. They knew many would lose their lives to achieve independence. That was fine with Criollos as long as their revolution would be like the American Revolution, which left the social hierarchy intact, unlike the French and Haitian revolutions, which dismantled their hierarchies. The Criollos wanted to remain in power. They did not want the lower class of the mestizos, Indians, and copper-colored people to achieve any political power. In the end, both the American Revolution and the Haitian Revolt were successfully completed by populations smaller than Mexico's, and both had to overthrow world powers greater than Spain. Right? The Criollos took the risk and decided to fight. Right? And now we're going to get into some more important stuff, right? This is right before we about to get into the Vincent Guerrero story, right? Right? But you know what? Let's just introduce these two topics first, right? Father Hidalgo was a Criollo, but was not your typical priest. He was a known gambler and even had 3 children with 2 different women, right? A sinner. However, even though he was flawed as a priest, he was still considered the father of the Mexican independence movement. Early on September 16th, 1810, Father Hidalgo rang the town's church bells to call the people to mass. He was about to be arrested as a conspirator against the crown. As the people assembled, he gave his famous speech, the Grito del Dolores, the cry of Dolores. The speech started the war that ultimately freed Mexico from Spain. So Father Hidalgo, right? Father Hidalgo was the revolutionist that freed Mexico from Spain. Just like how George Washington was the revolutionist that freed America, quote unquote, from Great Britain. Right? They hold the same role. From Father Hidalgo, we go into Jose Maria Morelos y Pavon. He would replace Hidalgo as the leader of the revolution. Unlike Hidalgo, Morelos was a mestizo, right? A aboriginal Spanish mixed person, right? Or just a copper-colored person in general. And unlike Hidalgo, Morelos was a brilliant military leader who used guerrilla tactics to win several key victories. Right? Because Morelos was a mestizo and brought the lower classes into the revolution, the Peninsulares and Criollos became afraid of mob violence, social revolution, and preferred Spanish rule, the Morelos rebellion, which they viewed as chaos. So the Criollos, right, the people who believed they should be in power, sided with the Spaniards before letting Morelos take over the country, creating a social revolution. Right? Just like the Civil War, right? So to say. Just like the Civil War, creating a civil war. Right? And from there, we went down to Augustin de Iturbide. Right? For a decade, he had fought against the rebels on the side of the Spanish king. Right? He switched sides. After he tracked down Morelos, he was after the new leader of the rebellion, Vincent Guerrero. He was after Vincent Guerrero. However, Iturbide would eventually get removed from his command because he was a cruel commander. Right, so now we're going to talk about Vincent Guerrero. He was the leader of the Mexican Revolution at the time. His story is interesting though, right? First black Indian president, Vincent Guerrero, the first black Indian president. The term first black Indian, right? A mestizo. The brother was a mestizo, basically. That's the term we're going to give him. And in his story, he did some things that left an effect on Mexico that the people of Mexico deal with today, right? Let's check it out. So what does it say? And we're going to start off right here, right? Guerrero's African roots, right, appears to come mostly from the future president's father, Pedro, who was in the almost entirely Afro-Mexican profession of mule driver. Vicente's mother, Guadalupe, was known for her light complexion. Vicente's political career appears to have started with his baptism. He was born in a period of quiet resistance to Spain's caste system. We just spoke about it. Its occupational discriminations and racially different tax rates, military obligations, degrees of punishment for criminal offenses, and etc. Right? They calling him an African Mexican though, but there's no root to where his parents, his African, quote unquote African parents come from. Right? How would an African be able to rise so fast in power, right? Without even understanding the language. It's the same situation like Toussaint Louverture. They called him an African, but he was really just a French Arawak mixed native, right? Really, Guerrero is called the Mexican Abraham Lincoln, right? And in his story, let's check it out. In his story, let's check it out. Because I was reading it, but I kind of forgot. I'm not even going to lie, but let's check it out. So look, what did it say? Acts of resistance to caste included poor record keeping. For instance, the priests of Guerrero's town of Tixla broke caste rules and omitted racial designations on baptism certificates during the year of Vicente's birth. A year after Vicente's birth, Father Saucedo Cabero was replaced in Tixla by a priest who reinstated the required racial labeling on new baby records. He was born in Tixla, right? So what we know about Tixla is one of the tribes that fought against the Aztecs came from Tixla. They came from Tixla. So all of this Afro ancestry, we got to pack that up. We got to pack that up. Got to pack all that up, right? In addition to priests who failed to record race, there was a resistance against the Spanish racial census takers in this period. In the 1791-1793 census, for instance, there were villages where indigenous blacks and mixes thereof banded together to intimidate the census takers into declaring everyone Spanish, thus avoiding taxes, military duty, and etc. Right? They banded together and intimidated the census takers to declare them all Spanish. Right? They lost their ancestry. Right? They were all declared Spanish. They said blacks and mixes thereof. Indigenous blacks and mixes thereof. All being the same people, right? All being the same people when they talking about these two. Mixes thereof, mestizos, right? Stuff like that. Some villagers hid when the head counter arrived, as reflected in the census. Remarkably higher number of Afro-Mexican widows. Vicente's father, Pedro Guerrero, was an intense opponent of slavery. One of the customers on Pedro's mule runs was Gabriel Yermo, who owned one of the biggest haciendas in Mexico, slave plantations. In 1790, Yermo celebrated the birth of his first child by freeing all of his more than 400 slaves. Pedro Guerrero was elated. Apparently, he made such a fuss over the matter that some early biographers of President Guerrero reported that Yermo had freed Pedro. Right, so Pedro's father was a slave under Gabriel Yermo as a possibility under this hacienda owner. Newer evidence shows Pedro was born free, or that Pedro could have been born free. Vincente Guerrero's father also could have been born free. So could he have been a Criollo or a revolutionist? However, there was at least one family member in slavery as late as 1723. Date of a slave manumission papers in Vincente Guerrero's archives. The admiration of Pedro Guerrero for the Spaniard Guillermo was enhanced when Guillermo freed an additional 200 slaves on the second plantation Guillermo had purchased. During the 1810-1821 Mexican War for Independence, Pedro Guerrero supported the Spanish side. Okay, so he could have been a Criollo, believing that Guillermo had showed that racial progress could come without revolt. Alright, so he sided with the Spanish side, so he could have been a Criollo. Pedro Guerrero could have been a Criollo, or let's just say a copper-colored Spaniard, right? Because they call him Vincente Guerrero a black man. But if his father was African, where does the last name Guerrero come from? Right? His slave master's name is Guillermo, right? Gabriel Guillermo. So where does the African ancestry come from? That's my question. Vincente, right, had an argument with his father, and Vincente packed his bags and went to join the revolution. At Navidad's village of San Geronimo on the Acapulco coast, Vincente Guerrero met a small army of Mexican revolutionaries under General Jose Maria Morelos y Pavon, mule driver in Guerrero's region. Morelos assigned the 27-year-old Guerrero to serve under Officer Hermindiglio Galena, descendant of an AWOL sailor on a British pirate ship who settled on the coast northwest of Acapulco, where he was said to have stood out brightly among the blacks and mulattoes, who comprised the vast majority of the population on the coastal strip. Wow, right? Mixing of different peoples. But this British pirate ship usually carried the Moors, right? The pirates were Moors. A lot of them were Moors. So he could have been lighter skinned, right? And he stood out amongst the blacks and mulattoes. He could have. Right? Could have. It's a possibility. Right? A lot of history in that one, though. There's a lot of history that lies in that one right there. According to the Spanish census, the people of San Geronimo were virtually all padro. Census terms for a person of African descent. Right? Basically, Negro. A person of African descent does not mean they from Africa. They just dark skin, right? They copper, they brown skin. They my skin complexion. They your skin complexion. Right? Check this out. Actually, a local historian records that the village was one of many on the coast where the quote-unquote Africans, right? Check the quotes. Were almost all Asians who had been brought to Acapulco on the galleons the Spaniards sent from Manila. The Asians were declared African because the Spaniards wanted more slaves, and by law, only Africans could be slaves, right? So here another one declaring that these slaves, right, or these dark-skinned people are not Africans. They are from Manila. And we're not talking about Chinese Asians. Asiatic peoples. That's what we talk about. It could be Malays, Hindus, right? Stuff like the same thing with like Guyanese folks, right? Most of the Asian slaves were dark-skinned, having been taken from their homes in Borneo, New Guinea, Malaysia, and the southern islands of the Philippines. Right? No Africa, such as the island of Negroes. So the name, because the Negritos lived there. Right? This is where the term in Central America, Negritos, comes from. Because they brought these darker-skinned Asian slaves over there. Not Africans. Right? Not Africans. Vincent Guerrero lost contact with Natividad and her mother Maria Nieves during the Independence War. In 1818, he married Guadalupe Hernandez. At that time, the two already had a daughter, Dolores, the only known surviving child for Vicente. The war that cost him contact with Natividad took the lives of over 1 million people. Spaniards burnt villages and herded inhabitants into what we call modern times strategic hamlets. The revolutionists purposely destroyed the mines and sugar processing machinery in hopes of driving out the Spaniards. To dissuade the rebels, the Spaniards dotted the roadsides with crucified and impaled bodies of captured insurgents, right? All-out warfare. The independence struggle in Mexico was more intense than in other Latin American countries, with the exception of Haiti. So what was going on in Haiti was similar to what was going on in Mexico. Right? The Mexican Revolution was a bloody war, right? Extremely bloody war for the inhabitants of that land. Lost a lot of people. Something that needs to be talked about a little bit more, right? Because it's a part of our history, right? In some way, shape, or form. For both Mexico and Haiti, independence was also a social revolution. The main historian of Afro-Mexico, Gonzalo Aguirre Beltran, writes in his La Población Negra de Mexico that the one transcendent feature of the revolution for independence was the shift from caste to class, right? From caste system to enslavement to racial enslavement, right? Racial and class, like class, caste is the labor. Class is we just don't like you because you black, right? You poor and you black. That's what that is. Same thing as here in America. Same thing, right? Same thing, right? The hate they show our people, it is mind blowing. Right, this means, right, that 400 years a slave is really a real thing. Y'all gotta understand, man. It's really a real thing. From the time Colombo got here, 1492, to the 1860s, 1880s, 1890s, right? This is where we was finally able to get a taste of quote unquote freedom, even though we weren't still free, right? It's paid labor. It's not freedom. They still own people, right? But that's 400 years. From caste to class, 400 years a slave. Guerrero played a crucial role in the abolition of the caste at independence in 1821. And 3 months into his presidency in 1829, he issued his country's slavery abolition decree. Right? He abolished slavery in Mexico. The basic philosophy of Guerrero, followed in updated form by generations of his descendants, was that political democracy was essential and that to achieve it, Mexico needed its military champion racial equality. Guerrero explained in 1821 that he and others on the freedom side had been eager to make peace with Spain in 1812. And on terms that would have left Mexico a part of the Spanish Empire. But that year, a racist clause was voted into a new Spanish constitution passed in Madrid. The constitution was a divide and conquer document that offered political rights and an end to caste for all of Spain's many colonized indigenous white mixed races and whites, while retaining old caste law for anyone with African root, which included the Asian Padros as well. And let's remember, African root, sub-Saharan, darker skinned people, copper colored people, right? Not Africans, copper colored people, right? Remember, Pedro Guerrero is Vincent Guerrero's father, and he was a slave, quote unquote, potentially under Gabriel Yermo, right? None of those people have African names. None of those people. Guerrero noted that people in the colonies with at least some African in their blood far outnumbered those with European and perhaps even indigenous heritage. He declared that the Constitutional Congress denial of rights to the greater part of the population was horrifying conduct, so contrary to all rights natural, divine, and of society. Because of the racist clause, he wrote Mexico had no choice but to fight on from 1812 to complete independence in 1821. although it was native Mexicans rather than Africans who were the majority in the colony of Mexico, right? Africans were numerous. Native Mexicans, native copper-colored folks, right, and Swarthia Europeans were numerous. They were officially 10.2% of the population, and Guerrero Beltran estimated that at least 30% of the Mexican people had African heritage in 1810. Some passed as whites or mestizos. Why would Africans pass as whites? How can an African pass as a white? Even if you do mix with a lighter skinned person. Right? Just to rewind on it, how do these people even understand each other? Them shipwrecked pirate ships. These were Moors. Right? And once they shipwrecked, they ended up mixing into these indigenous societies, creating mestizos. And many great more were black Indians, the descendants of slaves who ran away to Indian villages and the offspring of African slaves who desired native women because there were few black women imported, and because a loophole in Spanish law said that any child born of a slave and an Indian woman took the mother's free status. That's crazy, right? They tell us though in plain sight early on in the documents that the folks who were mixing were the Spaniards and the Indians, right? But not all Spaniards were conquistadors, right? And not all conquistadors were Spaniards. They were also Italians, Germans, which we know were Moors, right? This is the 16 and 1700s, right? What else we got? Flight rebellions in the loophole helped to reduce the number of slaves to around 15,000 of the 634,000 Afro-Mexicans in 1810. 98% were mixed race. An important factor in the black Indian Guerrero's life was his positive relations with native Mexicans. He was raised in the traditionally all indigenous barrio of Tlatelolco. There he learned native languages. His barrio was in the mountain town of Tixla, right? And what we know about the mountains is that the Aztecs chased a lot of these tribes out to the mountains. These people were running away to the mountains, making their habitats in the mountains. If you go to Central America today, you go to the mountains, those people will kill you on sight, because those are the folks who are protecting what they got left, because their ancestry dates them as far as back to the natives of that land. So he was raised in a native society, in one of those societies that if you go there, they will kill you on sight today as we speak, to preserve what they have left. Guerrero envisioned a future built on majority rule by those of his African and indigenous roots. While he was but one among many Afro-Mexicans with an officer's rank in the Independence Army, he was one with a few special closeness to the indigenous people. One of the others was Morelos, who, like Guerrero, has a state in his name. Morelos was the ideological mentor to Guerrero and was the general of the struggle until his capture and execution in December of 1815. Morelos' close tie to the indigenous world was through Maria Almonte, the pure Indian mother of the priest's 4 children, right? Pure Indian mother, Maria Almonte. Pure Indian though. Most likely had her name anglicized, right? Pure Indian. Guerrero has no record speech prior to 1815. Until that time, he was used primarily to recruit native Mexicans into the war cause. Indigenous language discourse did not get in print. Winning over nativos was not easy. Many had long-standing treaties of peace with the Spaniards. Village revolts between 1780 and 1810 resulted in many new peace pacts. Historian William B. Taylor shows in his study of rural life in the period. In 1810, In the 1810 war, the Mexican side needed indigenous people because Mexican whites deserted the revolutionary ranks as the going became difficult. The war effort became a struggle against Spain, led disproportionately by Afro-Mexicans. Right, here they go, calling them Afro-Mexicans again, right? But they just said they needed indigenous people. So who are we talking about? Who exactly are they talking about? Who are they talking about? This is apparent in the officers under Guerrero during the 3 tough 1818 to 1820 years of the war. The officers in this period for whom a city or county is named are the Afro-Mexicans Guerrero, Juan Alvarez, Gordiano Guzman, and Francisco Anatoliano Santa Maria. The Afro-Asians Isidoro Monteseca Decoa and Luis Pinzon. The indigenous Anatolia Nava and Mariano Olorate. The mestizo Guadalupe Victoria and the so-called white Nicholas Canton, who appears from records to have people of color in his family. Right, so let's rewind. Afro-Mexicans. Surnames are extremely important, y'all. Last names are important. Alvarez is not an African last name. Guzman is not an African last name. Santa Maria or Altiliano is not an African last name. None of those are African last names. Surnames are extremely important. They carry on for generations. Right? Generations. When Guerrero finally got into print, it was a transcript of speech given in the basically indigenous region of Tlapa and the state of Guerrero. He's speaking to indigenous people. Right? He's trying to uplift indigenous people. He's a part of the indigenous community. Right? He's of the land. They have a connection to the land that they are trying to protect. He urged that they look beyond their traditional village councils and form larger ones. Not for my liberty, nor for that of your own benefit, nor that of other private interests, but instead for that great general liberty, and of the common benefits that bring honor to this very noble pueblo. The word pueblo connotes in Spanish both a village and the people, in the sense of an entire nation's people. In this speech, Guerrero gave pueblo both meanings, which provided a communal definition to citizenship, rather than the European individualistic definition that the future president envisioned in 1815, a communal organized people, such as the Tlapa indigenous population. Using the power of citizenship was something of an invitation to socialism before socialism had been invented. The same thing that Abraham Lincoln did. Very, very, very similar. This is why they called him the Mexican Abraham Lincoln. This is exactly why, as a matter of fact. This is how he was like swaying the people. Right? This is how he swayed the people. A final attempt by the rulers at racial divide and conquer in Mexico was made during the negotiations early in 1821 over a plan to bring peace and independence. Commander-in-Chief Guerrero was in negotiations with the general for Spain, Augustin Iturbide, who was an upper-class white Mexican, right? Augustin Iturbide, right? We spoke about him. This man right here, right? He went after Guerrero, but he lost his role in the Spanish army, and this caused tension between him and his commanding officer. He met with Guerrero, and they planned a coup d'etat. Right, they planned a coup d'etat together to overthrow the Spanish king, or to overthrow Spanish colonial authorities, shall we say. Where we at? Yeah, a collapsed economy and political changes in Spain had made the elite toy with the idea of independence. Moreover, Iturbide had been beaten in a 2-month series of battles by the soldiers of Guerrero. Entebbe offered to switch sides and join Guerrero if certain guarantees could be offered to the rich and powerful in an independent Mexico, right? So he was still a representation of the Criollos. He still wanted to remain in power, right? And he still wanted power for the rich and powerful. Part of the protection sought was that political rights would be granted to indigenous and Indio whites, but not to blacks or mulattoes, right? What Entebbe wanted was a social divide. He wanted the light-skinned folks, the lighter-skinned rich folks, to remain in power, and he wanted all those who were lower class and colored folks, right? He wanted all of those folks to be stripped of power or to just remain powerless, thus creating a divide again, right? Guerrero angrily declared that he cannot be signature to any agreement that did not include full rights of all Mexicans. Subsequently, the plan of Iguala agreed to by Entebbe and Guerrero included Clause 12. All inhabitants without distinction of their European, African, or Indian origins are citizens, with full freedoms to pursue their livelihoods, including to the merits and virtues. 6 months after February 24th, 1821, issuing of the plan of Iguala, Mexico was free. Thousands of conscripted Mexicans on the Spanish side had switched to the freedom cause and thus ensured victory. Law 279 of the First Congress of the new nation was a version of the Iguala Equality Clause. In 1823, Guerrero declared that it was time to move beyond racial equality to equality of class, right? Again, from caste to class, right? He's trying to heal the wounds, because it was now clear that the way of true freedom is living with the knowledge that no one is above anyone else, that there is no title more honored than that of the citizen, and that applies be the person in the military, a worker, a government official, a cleric, a landowner, a laborer, a craftsman, or a writer, because the sacred belief in equality has leveled us before the law. He believed in freedom all around. This is what they're saying. He believed in freedom being versatile. And during the 1823 to 1824, Guerrero served for a time on a 3-person junta which ran the country until the election of the first president of Mexico, the mestizo Guadalupe Victoria. In Victoria's term of office, Guerrero played a large role in organizing what would be called the People's Party. So Guadalupe Victoria was Mexico's true first black president. The mestizo, the first aboriginal, right? Guadalupe Victoria, aboriginal mixed, right? What they said about her. The mestizo, aboriginal mixed indigenous woman or person, right? Female, male, not too sure what they said. Oh, female, male. The first, Mexico's true first black president. In Victoria's term of office, Guerrero played a large role in organizing what would be called the People's Party, which was actually a political organization acting out of newly formed York Rite Masonic lodges. So Vincente Guerrero was involved in Freemasonry, right? They were a part of a Masonic lodge. The party ran him for president in 1828. It was a continuous election because much was at stake. Throughout Mexico, peasants had created village and town councils elected without regard to race or economic status. An abundance of the councils had elected illiterate mayors, and many a council was composed of Indians who spoke no Spanish. Right? This is what they filled the party with. This is what Vincente Guerrero filled the party with. It was a flowering of democracy Guerrero had urged in Talpa in 1815, and would be severely curtailed in the year following Guerrero's presidency. In his presidential inaugural address on April 1st, 1829, Guerrero aggressively championed a village council movement, declaring that the interests of the people were best served by the closest political body that represented them. The day after his inauguration, Guerrero addressed Congress in untamed words that summed up his overall commitment to democracy. The administration is obliged to procure the wildest possible benefits and apply them from a palace of the rich to the wooden shack of the humble laborer. If one can succeed in spreading the guarantees of the individual, if equality before the law destroys the efforts of power and of gold, if the highest title between us is that of citizen, if the rewards we bestow are exclusively for talent and virtue, we have a republic, and she will be conserved by the universal suffrage of a people solid, free, and happy. Right now, I'm assuming, right, this was his inauguration speech. That was his speech. He wanted freedom for everybody, from the palace to the wooden shack. Guerrero's vision of democracy of all classes and races was not shared by either of the two political factions of the suit-wearing gentlemen of the nation. These designated liberal and conservative politicians felt that it was anathema that indigenous or black villagers who could neither read nor write should elect their own councils, right? They wanted to strip the people, because they thought they were slow, of the power. Right, this is what the suit-wearing gentlemen of the nation wanted to do. This is in Mexico, after Guerrero helped these people gain some type of power, the indigenous people. What Guerrero proposed in answer to the liberals and conservatives is called by historian Peter Guardino a political third way. It is one that flows throughout modern Mexican history. The Guerrero course flowed, for instance, during the 1910 revolution, after liberal Francisco Madero overthrew the conservative Porfirio Diaz. Peasants under the black Indian peasant Emilio Zapata rose up against both. Even in 1910, we had black Indians fighting for power, or fighting for freedom, fighting against dictators. The true heroes, these are the heroes of history. The Guerrero political ideology of peasant elected self-government at the local level surfaced again in 1994 in Chiapas in the revolt of the indigenous rebels who took the name the Ejército Zapatista Liberación Nacional, however you pronounce it. God damn it. I need to work on my Spanish. Right, but even in 1990, we had indigenous rebels fighting back. This is in Chiapas. All the people ever had to do was fight ever since the time of the Olmecs. It's crazy. Right? A critically important act by Guerrero was his September 16, 1829 slavery abolition decree. Although not initially enforced in Texas, its eventual enforcement there contributed to the 1836 slave owner-led secession of Texas from Mexico, right? This is what led to Texas becoming a part of Mexico, right? Prior to the Mexican-American War. Guerrero did not live to fight the Texas slavers, you see. 3 months after abolishing slavery, he was driven from Mexico City and forced to engage in a guerrilla war against a new government of reactionaries. Kidnapped by agents of the contesting government, Guerrero was executed in February 1831. His cause lived on, however, through family. 3 months after execution, Guerrero's daughters Dolores married Mariano Rivera Palencia. Mariano had been the head of the city council in Mexico City during Dolores' father's brief presidency. The young couple's first child, Vincent II, was born October 16, 1832. It was a day of curfew and gunfire in the capital that was signaling the spread of a revolt by moderates that would overthrow the government that had orchestrated the killing of Guerrero, right? They was getting back for Vincente Guerrero because they took him out in 1831. The black Indian Vincente Guerrero, right? Revolutionary in Mexico, a hero who wanted to unite people. He gave people freedom. He gave indigenous people freedom. Right? And they took him out because of that. His death was followed by a truce which left many of his lieutenants free. His politically active wife Guadalupe had earned the nickname La Generala. Around La Generala, his daughter Dolores and son-in-law Mariano Rivera Palacio, there developed a social world of Guerreristas. Right? They created another term. They created the term Guerreristas. Black indigenous people fighting for freedom. When in transit, they knew that they could rely on Dolores to keep track of their mail. The crowd that La Generala, her daughter and son-in-law gathered included former president cabinet members for Guerrero, Jose Maria Bocanegra and Francisco Moctezuma, this last name continuing on. Pure Indian, right? Francisco Moctezuma, pure Indian, right? Surnames, important, y'all. Extremely important, like I said. Along with generals covered with medals who had fought for Guerrero, notably the Afro-Mexican general and future president Juan Alvarez, known to the family as Uncle Juan. Alvarez took under his wing a youthful campaign worker for Guerrero's 1820 election. Benito Juarez, the pure indigenous Ocoxan, who would become Mexico's most noted mid-19th century militant. Pure indigenous, right? Fighting in the 1800s, right? That says a lot about the revolutionaries up until the 1900s. These are indigenous people, black indigenous people, right? Indigenous copper-colored people, right? Mexico's history, rich history, right? We see it gets even deeper, right? It gets even deeper because a lot of this stuff pushed on up until today, right? They pushed on up until today. Let's check this last part out, and then we're gonna pick up on this in the next one, right? When we're gonna continue the history of Mexico, right? Check this out. In 1861, Juarez told Vicente to clear out the massive archives of Spanish Inquisition in Mexico and to publicize from those 38,000 little boxes of data the evidence of Spain's oppression and Mexico's resistance against it. Right? They had a massive archive of the Spanish Inquisition, and they wanted to publicize it. Publicize the truth. The truth. That's what they wanted to do, to put out the truth. Right? Very, very bold. This would be the start of an intellectual adventure in defining his nation. Vicente Rivera Palacio would end up going far beyond the Inquisition files to produce novels, short stories, essays, political tracts, and an enormous multi-volume history of Mexico. The truth. He dug out the Inquisition files, right? Which I'm pretty sure led people to know and understand that a lot of their ancestry comes from Europe, because that's what's in these Inquisition files. Vincente Guerrero never had the time to create a large written record of his political beliefs, nor did he have the higher education that helped his grandson Vicente. But it seems safe to consider the grandson's work an extension of the basic outlook of the grandfather, and that grandson was raised in a household of Guerreristas, lived for the time in the grandfather's hometown, and spent additional time in his youth on the ranches of ex-generals and political aides of the fallen president. Best example of the pen is mightier than the sword, because it most definitely is. When Guerrero's grandson got the opportunity to go over the Inquisition records, he made the most of it. Historian Diaz E. de Alvando evaluated Rivera Palacios' subsequent novels and short stories and concluded that among their principal themes were the problems of the caste system, slavery, the adventurous rebellions of the blacks and Indios, and their punishments. Newspaper serializations of Rivera Palacios' historical fiction were widely popular. An editor in 1868 reassured readers that while Rivera Palacios' current novel would end Friday, a new one would start Monday. He had this like on a weekly series, just spreading the truth. This is the 1800s. Spreading the truth. The Inquisition files. Using the pen. Mightier than the sword, y'all. The villains of the stories included the Spanish conquistadors, greedy landlords, and the Inquisition described as intellectually mordant, and the enemy of racial and political tolerance. The heroes included molders of new culture and fighters for respect for the people of Mexico. Of the literally few thousands of pages of writing by the grandson of Black Indian Guerrero, it seems fitting that one of the first national heroes written about would be Gaspar Yanga, the leader of the 1570 slave revolt in Veracruz, right? Another black indigenous person, copper-colored person. A native of Gabon, Yanga created a maroon colony of nearly 500 people. In 1609, he evaded a Spanish army effort to defeat him and obtained a treaty for freedom and land for him and his people. Right? He titled his account Los 33 Negroes in memory of the 29 men and 4 women executed in Mexico City 3 years after Yanga got his treaty. Right? He wrote a book of the heroes. They even linked, right? Check this out. Cuauhtémoc, who led the Aztecs in the last stages of their fight for survival, with the plight of the Jewish Caraval family a century later, that is noted for its members who were burned alive at their stake for their religious beliefs. Jews burned in Mexico City alive at the stake for their religious beliefs. In 1525, the captured Cuauhtémoc had his feet slowly burnt off in a torture intended to him to reveal the secrets. In Rivera Palacios' novel, the Aztec martyr has a child by a Portuguese woman of Jewish faith. This is the Inquisition in a nutshell, right? Portuguese woman of Jewish faith coming over here, right? Most likely came over here under a different moniker. Who had converted, who he calls Isabel de Carabal. Their son Felipe creates a large family, and he lives long enough to see 3 young women members of this Aztec Jewish alliance put to the stake because of their origins. Big drop. Big drop. Right, and real quick. Let's check this out. Real quick. I want to look into this Caraval family. This Jewish Caraval family. We're going to do this real quick before we conclude this one. Right? The manuscripts of Louis de Caraval. They were Jews. In 1596, Louis de Caraval, along with his mother and sister, were condemned to the flames in an auto de fe in Mexico City for their secret adherence to Judaism. History in a nutshell. Right? These were crypto Jews. They were conversos, descendants of Jews who converted to Catholicism, often under great duress in Spain and Portugal during the late Middle Ages. A minority of these converts maintained their ancestral faith in secret, braving the wrath of the Inquisition. Right? These were Sephardi, copper-colored folks. Right? This is what they mean when they say Afro-Mexican. Because Cuauhtémoc, right, in the story, Cuauhtémoc, right, They created an Aztec Jewish family. This is what they mean by black Mexican, right? Black and Indian, right? Copper color and Indian, right? Where we was at. They moved to Mexico for the same reason other Spaniards left the old world for the new. Economic opportunities and a chance to remake themselves in the new land. The same way other Spaniards, while the Inquisition only functioned in Americas between 1571, many conversos migrated to the ports and major urban centers of the Americas. From the earliest days of the Spanish conquest and the colonization in the early 17th century. Right? Carval's uncle, also named Luis de Carval, was a decorated conquistador who was named the governor of the frontier territory of the Nuevo Reino de Leon in the northeastern part of modern-day Mexico. He invited his relatives to join him in New Spain. Though he was a devout Catholic, much of his family, including his nephew Louis, who worked as his main assistant, were crypto Jews. They were crypto Jews, right? Man, Mexico's rich history, bro. Mexico's rich history, man. Central America's rich history. We just spoke about a lot. Like from yesterday till today, what we discovered that the Olmecs were not the ones to uproot civilization in Mexico, right? They are invaders. The Aztecs are invaders. They changed the entire religious structure over there to mimic their style, right? As a matter of fact, the Aztecs are very, very similar to the Romans. We learned, right? We learned that when Hernan Cortez came over here, he gathered other tribes as allies to fight against the Aztecs because those other tribes hated the Aztecs for their cruelty. We learned that their first president of Mexico was black Indian, a mestizo. We learned that Mexico had a parliament full of indigenous people. We learned that the Vincent Guerrero gave power to the indigenous people of the land, right? And he was murked just for doing so. Very similar. I can see why they call him the Black Abraham Lincoln. Even though we don't pay much homage to Abe Lincoln on this side, right? He did what he did. We can only look at the Vincent Guerrero story from this lens, man. He tried to do a lot for the people. He did a lot for the people, right? And now we seeing, right, what they mean by Afro-Mexican, right? Jews and Indians mixing, mestizos, criollos, and what categorize you as African is just the color of your skin. A total hijack, a complete hijack, and it's mind blowing, bro. But hey, man, this is why we here to decipher history. When we step back in this one, we gonna return back to that Caraval family. We're gonna do some research on that family. We learned they crypto Jews, they conversos, right? They Jews, but they coming over here under a Catholic faith. They hiding. Conquistadors, indentured servants, forced to work, forced to go to war, forced to conscript, right? And they were burned at the stake after folks them discovered that they were Jews, erasing the entire bloodline. Right? It's crazy, man. History is crazy, man. Mystery is crazy. But this is why we do what we do. It's the Copper Color King, man. I thank y'all for tuning in for this one. It's another banger, man. We gonna definitely hit the field running and gunning next week. Man, I got so much more content to continue to deliver. A lot more content, man. We got more books to read. Like I said, we still got to go over the invasion of the Mongols in the Americas, right? Where do these Siberians come from? Right? The invaders, right? A lot to talk about. We got a lot to talk about. I appreciate y'all for tuning in, though, man. Copper Color King, man. Like, comment, and subscribe. Click that notification bell. Share a friend. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Like I said, man, we got that coloring book dropping real soon. That's going to be a real good one. Right? It's a lot in that one. A lot. I can't wait. Right? I'm going to have some real in-depth descriptions on that one. Maybe a nice little visualizer just to spice things up. You know what I mean? A lot more coming, man. Thank you for tuning in. Like I said, much love. Peace and blessings. Peace to the oracles and the architects, man. Copper Color King, we out.